Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast, coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so happy that you're part of our beautiful Reading with Your Kids family. Thank you for subscribing to the show wherever you find your podcast. We have a wonderful guest for you today. She is the author of Grandma Charlotte's Adventures. Her name is Marla Stahl. This episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is sponsored by Noahsaurus, by Elaine Kylie Kearns. Do you know someone who's a Noahsaurus? Is your child a Noahsaurus? Is your spouse a Noahsaurus? Does your child or your spouse ever have one of those days where they wake up and their answer to everything is no? Well, have I got a picture book for you. Noahsaurus by Elaine Kylie Kearns. Noahsaurus woke up feeling very no. No to brushing his teeth, no to eating breakfast, and definitely no to playing with his little brother. Things only get worse when Noah goes for a walk and discovers that the relentlessly cheerful Toby Rex, Brian Brontosaurus, and Ava Ceratops are following him. Together, the group starts a bona fide dino parade that even Noah cannot resist. This lighthearted, whimsical story will have readers laughing at Noah and his friends, as well as their own bad moods. This hilarious book pairs two of little kids' favorite things, saying no and dinosaurs. Adults can also relate to waking up on the wrong side of the bed and feeling very no all day too. Adults can really find a lot of wisdom in children's books. Noahsaurus is available on Amazon and on Elaine's website, ElaineKylieKearns.com. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by journalist and multi-published author Megan Meehan and her amazing online children's book writing class. Are you someone who dreams of writing a children's book, but you say, no, I don't have the time, I don't have the support, I don't have the experience, I don't have the knowledge to write a children's book? Well, put all those excuses on the shelf. Megan Meehan's online children's book writing class is the answer for you. Megan is a published novelist, poet, producer, playwright, and screenwriter. You may have heard Megan on the podcast celebrating her latest children's book, Abila's Adventure, a delightful tale of a Brazilian pirate who moves to New York City. Now here's why you want to be a part of this class. Everything happens online. You learn at your own pace and on your own schedule. Now here's the best part of this class. At the end of the class, each student can expect to complete a short story and the children's literature genre. And all of those stories will then be professionally illustrated and published on Smart Kids Club. For more information, please email Megan directly at mehanms@aol.com, or you can call or text her at 845-538-0516. And we also very much want you to know that this episode of the podcast is brought to you by Dr. Connie Tate and her wonderful children's books, Scooter Boy, Roll On, and Sylvester's Catastrophic Tale. Summertime, and it's time to read. Curl up with a book. There's no better deed. Reading is magical. Just open a book. You can travel the world from your own cozy nook. You are going to love Dr. Connie Tate's books, and you're going to love meeting the characters in the books. Everybody, I mean, kids, parents, grandparents, everybody who reads Sylvester's Catastrophic Tale, you're all going to be rooting for Sylvester's safe return. And you're really going to dig Cal in Scooter Boy. He's a very, very cool character. And Ren, the star of Roll On, was inspired by Dr. Connie Tate's granddaughter. All of these great books are available at Amazon or at LuckyJennyPublishing.com. And don't forget to check out Dr. Tate's website, RollOnReading.com. You can find out more about her books and download some free activities at RollOnReading.com. Joining us right now from the great state of Maryland, she is the author of a delightful children's book called Grandma Charlotte's Adventures. Please welcome to the show, Marla Stahl. Marla, how are you?
I'm doing great today. How are you?
I am wonderful. The sun is, the sun's hiding today, but it was out all weekend long, so I'm pretty confident we are going to have a summer.
That would be wonderful, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would be. Wasn't so sure about a week ago. It wasn't looking good, but it is looking very good right now. And Grandma Charlotte's Adventures looks really good. Looks like it would be a lot of fun for a lot of families.
It is a lot of fun, and I have to tell you, it is a true story. I did not make any of it up, even though it is hilarious.
Well, I can't wait for you to tell us about it.
All right. Well, my mom has two dear friends, and one of them is obviously named Charlotte, and they met each other actually in their 70s in an exercise class. They were doing aerobics. And they got to be friends. And I don't want to give away too much of the story because it's pretty funny how they found each other for coffee and everything. I'm going to leave that as a surprise in the book. But they got to be good friends. And what we learned about Charlotte is that she was a teacher for many years. And she had retired, kids were grown, and she was a master gardener. And she would give presentations at Princeton University. They lived in New Jersey. Mm-hmm. And so she would give presentations there and do some special work for them. And at some point she decided, I don't know, late 50s, early 60s, she just wasn't content, not feeling like she was making enough of a difference in the world after all she had done with the children. Mm-hmm. And so she started volunteering. And she joined a group called Global Volunteers and subsequently some others as well. And literally started going all over the world at her own expense just to do amazing things that you would never think of. For example, her first assignment was to go up to learn medical Spanish. She didn't speak Spanish, and she had to learn medical Spanish to go up into the Andes Mountains to teach women about prenatal care because 1 out of every 4 babies survived, and she wanted to help them out. Wow. She subsequently went to Zimbabwe. We saw pictures of little girls wearing my daughter's jackets and shoes and things like that. She brought all the donations she could. She went to India, Vietnam, China, Romania, rocked babies for 7 hours a day in an orphanage for 2 weeks. She would lay on the jungle floor in Costa Rica studying lemurs. Riding down the Nile, she had a fish jump out and bite her on the leg, and the people said, "Oh my goodness, this only happens once every 100 years. You must be special." And about 15 minutes later, she's talking with her hands, and another one jumps out and bites her on the hand. And they're like, "Oh, you must be a queen. This is wonderful." She went to the Galapagos Islands, and she was riding on sea turtles. She was a tiny little thing, about 90 pounds, soaking wet, maybe barely 5 feet tall. Modest and humble as could be. She would come back and she would do all these presentations at Princeton, but you would just never know from talking to her that she just had all this wonderful energy and experience. 76 years old, she was hot air ballooning over the Serengeti.
Wow. Wow. We talk a lot on the show about books that inspire kids. But I think Grandma Charlotte's Adventures inspires me.
Yes. I always told her I want to be you when I grow up, especially when she told me about the babies in the orphanage. I'm like, I just want to be you when I grow up.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things that come to mind. Number one, we often talk about how impactful children's books can be for adults. And this is absolutely a great message for all of us that, life doesn't end when we retire.
Yes.
We had a guest on not too long ago, Phil Joel, who wrote an inspirational book talking about the fact that so many people, they stop living when they're 25 and then they don't die until they're 75. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like Charlotte is the polar opposite of that. Just living every single moment of her life, and that's an important message for kids and adults. And the other thing that I like, just hearing your description of it, is the fact that these two women found each other and developed a friendship in their 70s, and I think that gives hope for everyone. I think it's hard for kids to imagine sometimes adults making friends, and I don't think it's something that happens a lot. We have business acquaintances, but, a lot of us adults are kind of close ourselves off to friendship sometime, and we have those friends we had when we were kids, but then it's like, okay, I got my family, I got my kids, I got my spouse, but that's kind of it. And this is just a beautiful story of adventure and determination and friendship.
It is, and another cool thing about it is my mom, and you'll see if, when you're looking in the book, when Charlotte is describing all these adventures on the jungle floor with dangling spiders above her and everything, my mom always said, that's reason 972 why I don't go on these trips with you. Her adventures were more intellectual. So when she was in her 70s, she was taking Italian lessons. And a big part of the book is she loved the Weather Channel. She knew everything about weather. And she liked puzzles and things. So her adventures were more intellectual, used her brain, whereas Charlotte's were adventures. And to me, that's one of the beautiful things about their friendship, and for children and adults to learn, especially adults these days, is that we don't have to be just like someone else to be their friend. In fact, that makes the friendship even more interesting. I mean, I have friends that they go camping. I don't go camping. My idea of camping is staying at the Holiday Inn instead of the Hilton, I have a friend who rode in helicopters and did all these daredevil things, and I would never do that, but I love hearing her stories. So I think that's an important thing for adults and children to know, that the more diverse our friendships are, the more rich our lives are.
Yes. And that's such an important lesson, I think, for our kids. And again, for adults, just understanding that, having these friendships with people who are different, and not only different in terms of race or culture, but just interest. There's nothing wrong. If you're a person who doesn't like to camp, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's, and we can share in each other's, like you said, sharing each other's adventures.
Absolutely. Another thing that comes through here, my dad was in the Navy, so we moved a lot. And I don't really keep in touch with anybody from my early childhood, but I am still friends with my friends from high school in California and Virginia. And I think that's an important piece too, because at one point you see during the story that Grandma Charlotte moved to be closer to her kids and grandkids. And they were both really sad about that. And my mom moved closer to be with me. But they still talked every week on the phone. And it was hilarious because they would call each other, and Charlotte would tell my mom about all her adventures, and they would talk for at least an hour. And then I would come home from work, and my mom would call me and regale all these stories for another hour, And so they were always in touch. And I still kept in touch with Charlotte after my mom passed. And it's just kind of a neat thing. And after all this stuff, you'll see at the end of the story, after all these adventures, her favorite thing was to come home and sit in her favorite chair with a cup of tea, talking to my mom, Grandma Shirley, with cats. Her cats were sitting on her head and sitting on her lap, and she's a cat lady. So after all those adventures, it was the comfort of home and loved ones and pets that made her the happiest.
That is so cool. Tell me, what was Grandma Charlotte's reaction when you told her you were going to immortalize her in this book?
Well, I'm not really sure. I have to tell you, if I could be honest for just a moment. The whole book started because she was in her 90s, and early 90s, and her daughter contacted me and said that she wasn't doing well, and they didn't know how much longer she would be with us. So this was early February, and you know what the weather's like here on the East Coast, and I didn't know if I'd be able to get up to New Jersey where they were having the funeral. So I said, let me prepare some statements, just some comments about her friendship with my mom and all that. So I did. And I said, if I can't make it, could you read them for me when people speak? And she said I would do that. Well, I got a call the next day saying my mom rallied. She's back. She's doing great. And I said, oh, well, let me change the wording and I'll just turn it into a story and you could read it to her so she'll remember all the fun things she did with my mom and, the fun conversations they had. So I did, and I sent it to her. And then I thought, oh, I'm reading the story version of it, and I'm thinking that would be such a fun children's book. So I did go ahead and write the book. Sadly, the day I got my first box of supplies of these books, it was the same day she passed away. She was 93. So she never got to actually see the book, but I had such an honor. I gave a book to all of her family members as a, memorial of her. And I asked if I could speak, how people do at funerals. Sure. And I was the only non-family member who spoke. And each person got up and started telling these stories. It's a very uplifting funeral. And, they were telling these stories, about all her adventures, and some of them were in my book. And I had asked if I could go ahead and read that to everybody gathered as my words. And they said, oh, absolutely. So those who had books were reading along, and I was reading, to the congregation and everything. And it was just so cool. I got down, they all came over and hugged me, and I'm still getting emails and notes saying, thanks for immortalizing my grandma or my aunt or whatever. It was just this beautiful, beautiful thing. But a lot of her stories had already been spoken about or, were in my book. And so, it just turned into this really beautiful thing.
Well, that is a really beautiful thing. And this is a book that is a launch pad for so many amazing conversations and that a family can have. And I'm going to share some of the things that I think a family can talk about while experiencing Grandma Charlotte's adventures. But why don't you begin by just telling us what you think some of the most powerful conversations families can have as they're reading or after they read this book?
Sure. In fact, I have them in the back of the book. I have a little educational section here. And the first one is we talk about how do you use your brain? What are your kind of adventures? So Grandma Charlotte went all over the world and had her fun adventures, but Grandma Shirley learned her things. Her adventures were watching the Weather Channel. This is a family joke. She was glued to the Weather Channel. We teased her all the time, and now I'm doing it too. But how do you experience your adventure? Sometimes using your brain could be an adventure. And so I ask, one of the things is we talked about her learning Italian. Do you speak another language? Which one do you speak? What's your favorite kind of adventure? Is it a physical adventure or an intellectual adventure? Write it down. I give them some space to do that. We talked about the different places that she went. So I asked them to see if they could find perhaps the Galapagos Island where she rode on the sea turtles on the map, or the Serengeti, and what kind of animals would you find in those places? And where is Romania? What continent is it on? And what countries are nearby? So they have a little bit of, education there. And then the thing that I like the most is because Grandma Charlotte did some really meaningful work. And so I asked, what can you do for others that would be super meaningful to you? Mm-hmm. And who can help you accomplish that? Mm-hmm. So they get to do a little reflection on how they can make a difference in the world. And then my last one was if you had a car, because part of it is there's a little piece, I'm not going to ruin it for you, but she has a special license plate. I'm just going to say that. And I said, if you had a car, what would you put on your license plate that would describe you or something that you love? And I also want to let them know that you can always, always be friends. Even if your friend moves away, that's always hard when you're a kid, right? Mm-hmm. You can always maintain those friendships. So those are the kind of things that I have as conversation starters in the book.
Well, I think that's really, really beautiful. It seems like kids and grandmas, grandpas, they have a special connection. And I think that this is such a wonderful book, and it can really inspire kids and empower kids. That whole idea that this woman that some people might see as tiny and elderly and she's not that strong, but wow, she is making a huge impact with her life and in the lives of others. And that's a way that a lot of kids see themselves, as tiny and not all that strong, and folks who people really don't think about as being powerful. But Grandma Charlotte could do it, and I can do it too.
That's right. Absolutely. No matter how old you are, no matter how young you are, no matter what your gifts are that you have, we can all do something to give back and be powerful in a meaningful way.
Yeah. And I also love the fact, and I've mentioned this in different contexts. I think one of the things that I see here, especially in the States, it might be similar in Canada or UK and countries that are similar to the States, but there seems to be a real kind of separation of the generations. There's the elderly folks go to the senior center, and kids go to the daycare centers, and when teenagers get older and they go to concerts, there's only other teenagers at concerts, at those concerts, and older folks, go to their own kind of music and comedy, and we all have our own channels that we watch and our own shows on TV. When I travel to different cultures, I see a lot more mixing of the generations. If I go to an event that's a Spanish concert, then I'll see young kids and grandmothers and people in between all dancing together. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I think it's something that we're missing, and I think that this is something that families can encourage with a book like Grandma Charlotte's Adventures, just to kind of help kids understand that, yeah, we can have friends who don't look like us and who speak different languages, and we can have friends with people who are a much different age than us too.
Absolutely, absolutely. I have a friend who does some children's music, and she specifically has the course between little tiny ones, toddlers and babies, and the older generation, and she mixes them together. So, if you don't have a grandchild, you can go adopt one for an hour and sing and play. And it's just this wonderful thing. So I always appreciate when people make that effort. And there is a special connection between grandmas and grandpas and children. There's something about that that's just very special.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know that Grandma Charlotte's Adventures is not your first book. Why don't you tell us about some of your other books?
Sure. Well, the first one I wrote was Can Sugar Come Out to Play? Sugar is my rescue dog. I believe you have a rescue dog as well.
I do.
And they come with some issues. Mine was very, very scared. She's still scared of my toaster, actually. But she's learned to be a happy and very well-loved girl. And we were outside talking to a neighbor. She's in the yard running around. I kept keeping an eye on her and bringing her back to where I was just so I can watch her. And all of a sudden she went behind a row of trees that I have, and I heard squawk, 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 and she was chasing a bird. So I picked her up and I put her in the house, and very gently but sternly, as if she were a 3-year-old, so now we have to share our yard with all the animals. You can't do that. And she's looking at me like, okay, Mommy. Well, the next day, literally for 6 days in a row, I would open the back curtains and I would see, when the first one was a squirrel that was scratching at the door, looking in the house. There was a cicada. There were bunnies looking at me. There were birds. It was the weirdest thing. And I was telling a friend about it, and I said, either they're thanking me for keeping her in the house, which is likely after yesterday, the other experience, or they want her to come out and play. I thought, oh, this would make a great children's book. So that one is all about, it's about sharing. It's about unconditional love, because Mama, that's me. Mama's motto is, I will always love you no matter what, even when you're naughty, and we need to share. And with the froggies too? Yes, we have to share with the froggies too. So that has a lot of really good values about love and caring and friendship. In that book. The next book was about the dog I had before Sugar named Lucy, and I called it Lucy the Amazing Wonder Dog, and it is based on true things that she did, although there's a little fantasy in there. She uses her imagination a lot. For example, if you do you watch the Food Network by any chance?
I do on occasion.
There's a show, Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives.
Yes.
And
familiar.
Lucy has her own TV show, the Dog Food Network, and her special is chewy bones, cookies, and fries. So she has a slightly different one. And the HGTV Home and Garden Network, there's a show called House Hunters, where hers is called Mouse Hunters. So historically, you could put a crumb at her nose and she wouldn't see it. You had to point it out. So the illustration is of her sniffing on the ground looking for a mouse, and you see a bookcase in the back and there's a mouse crawling right up in front of her, and she doesn't notice. But she barks, she protects the family from danger, and you see out the window it's the mailman, Or she climbs mountains and she's sitting on the sofa on top of a pile of blankets, things like that. So she uses her imagination, but it really is based on true things that she actually did, with a little bit of fantasy mixed in.
That is really, really cool. And I think as you're telling those stories and emphasizing that they're true stories, I think that's a great way to remind our kids that life is happening all around us, and that we're collecting stories, and that it's important for us to remember our stories and share them when we can. And if we have to embellish them a little bit, polish them up a little bit to make them more exciting, as long as you're not hurting on you, that's okay.
Sure. And I think it tells kids that you can use your imagination. So when I go to schools and I read that book, I say, so is this real or is it not real? And why is this funny? So they can see what the irony is in what's going on in the picture. I do have a couple more books. One I really want to talk to you about. It's called Mason the Ambassador, and it comes in both English and Spanish. I gone to visit a friend in Puerto Rico, and I saw hundreds of dogs. There are actually literally thousands of stray dogs on the island, and it's only gotten worse. I was very upset. We met this one dog in particular, just had me in tears for hours. And I came back. I said, I want to do something about it. So I went online and I found a place called Second Chance Animal Rescue of Puerto Rico, and started supporting them financially, and got to be friends with the lady who's the founder of it. And she said, why don't you write a book about my dog Mason? I said, well, tell me about him. And she's, like a Perry Mason kind of thing. Well, a lot of young people wouldn't know what Perry Mason was or who that was, right? So I said, tell me more. So she said, well, he kind of greets, well, first of all, he's in a doggy wheelchair. He can't use his back legs. And so he uses a doggy wheelchair. And so he's special there. And he goes and he greets all of the new dogs that come in. He kind of kisses them. And she said, kind of shows them the ropes in a doggy way, Mm-hmm. He's kind of an ambassador. I said, an ambassador? You mean an ambassador dog, right? And we had a good laugh. I said, okay, I'll see what I could do, but I couldn't come up with anything. So I went back to Puerto Rico for a subsequent trip to visit my friend for her birthday and got to go up to the sanctuary. She's up in the mountains of Puerto Rico in Villalba and got a whole tour. She wasn't there, but another friend was there who works with her closely, and she took us around. We met all of the dogs, and I took my friends and the camera and just started taking pictures of all the puppies, all the dogs. And I was apologizing to my friends for taking so long, and they were the ones that didn't want to leave. I had to practically drag them out of there. And it's just a wonderful book about Mason, and you could see his little wheelchair, and he has the most important job in the whole sanctuary. And we might consider him disabled, but he's not disabled in any way. He's just got it going on. And it's fun. I went to rub his belly when he was out of his wheelchair because he can't use his legs. Mm-hmm. He would kind of flop back and forth when I was rubbing his belly. It was just the cutest thing. So I went ahead and did this book. And one thing I like about that, I think it encourages for children with disabilities, can show them that, he's not disabled at all. He's got his chair, and it gives him his wheels and his freedom, and he has the most important job in the whole book. So maybe kids can relate to that.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's just a wonderful thing. And I have to tell you that the joy that I had is some of those dogs in my book have gotten adopted here back in the States. One in New Hampshire and one in, I believe, Minnesota. Uh-huh. And so I found out who the families were and got their addresses, and I sent them a book, and I said, here's your superstar on page 15 or whatever. And I get all these pictures of them. Here's Nichols going to the dog park. In fact, Nichols kind of adopted me. When I walked in, he just leaned on my legs and didn't want me to walk. And have I not had a dog at home who had to be an only dog, I would have taken him home. Mm-hmm. And I get these pictures of him happy, living his best life, sitting in the car, ears flapping on the way to the dog park, looking like he's smiling. I mean, it's a wonderful thing. So, and with all of my books, I share part of my proceeds usually with animal rescues, but sometimes people-oriented groups as well. For this particular book, because it's about them, I share my proceeds specifically with them as a fundraiser. And it becomes in English and Spanish. My friend that I went to visit, translated into Spanish. So it's also a good teaching tool for kids learning Spanish or teachers who are teaching Spanish, as well as kids who speak Spanish.
That's beautiful. I know very well the dog situation down in Puerto Rico. We have family all over the island, and it's a beautiful island. My last visit, I was sitting outside of my wife's cousin's shop, and one of those stray dogs just came walking over and leaned on me, and he was beautiful, and I was patting him, but I was also a little bit terrified, thinking, if this stray dog bites me, I'm going to be in a hospital. But he didn't, and he was there because they kind of adopted him at the shop, and they kind of fed him and took care of him. But I'm glad you wrote this book, because it is an issue, and there are dogs that need forever homes all over the world, but there's especially lots and lots of dogs needing those homes down in Puerto Rico.
Especially after the hurricane. And I have to do a shout out to Bonnie, because she was up on the mountain with 150 animals by herself during that hurricane for weeks on end. Mm-hmm. She had stocked up beautifully, and we all, donated for food and water for her and the dogs and everything, knowing the hurricane was coming, thinking it would just be a matter of days. Mm-hmm. Luckily, she's prepared. She had a rain garden, and things like that, but she was by herself, and she would have to let these dogs out in shifts. So she was always, she has 2 yards that they can run in, and one of them was damaged because the fence was down. They would have gotten out.
Sure.
And people literally bring dogs to her doorstep. I mean, she cannot go anywhere without another dog coming back. So she always has this huge amount of dogs. And so she was doing everything she could to get them exercise and fed and everything. She was exhausted. And at one point we couldn't hear from her because the communications being down. Mm-hmm. And we actually chartered a helicopter and brought her food and water and did like a little airdrop and made sure she was okay till she can get off the mountain. The mountain was impassable. Wow. And she was up there for weeks before anybody could get to her.
Wow.
So she's a hero.
Absolutely. Well, there's lots of heroes in your books, and that's exciting. Tell people where they can find out more about you and find out more about your books online.
Okay, my books are called, my web page is called Woof Books, like a dog, W-O-O-F, woof, woof, woof books. People think I'm saying wolf. It's woof, woof books, because they are mostly about dogs or animal-loving people. Mm-hmm. So it's www.woofbooks.com. They can also be found on Amazon under my name, Marla Stahl, S-T-A-H-L. And there's another one that's a lot of fun, too. I didn't get to tell you about it. Sugar Goes to the Dentist. And that one is pure fantasy because, dogs getting their teeth cleaned is not a fun thing. Mm-hmm. But that one I wrote, I was sitting in my dentist chair. Dental hygienist says, what's your next book? I said, oh, I don't have one planned yet. She said, why don't you write about Sugar going to the dentist? And I said, I don't know. And while she's cleaning my teeth, the wheels were turning. And I live about 2 miles from the dentist. By the time I got home, had the story written, got in there and and wrote it. And it's just really cute. She has a lot of fun. Really, I wrote it for children who are afraid to go to their first visit. Mm-hmm. And so she has fun. Everybody makes sure she's comfortable. They give her a toy. The chair goes up and down, almost like it's a ride at Disney World. And the most fun part is my illustrator put in, I didn't even notice this for months, the hygienist's earrings look like teeth.
Wow.
And once I discovered that, I had to go on Etsy and I had to buy her a pair of tooth earrings for her to wear to work. She loved it.
Well, I think all of your books would be a great addition to any family library, especially Grandma Charlotte's Adventures. We've been talking today to the author of that fantastic book, Marla Stahl. Marla, thank you so much for being part of our show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Maria Ashworth. She is the author of Be the One. You are the one that we are doing this podcast for, and we're so very, very excited that you're a part of our Reading with Your Kids family. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, on Stitcher Radio, on Apple Podcasts, Himalaya, Podbean, Podcast Addict, wherever you find your podcast, you can find us. And we want to thank you for taking the time to subscribe to the show. And we also want to thank some very special people who made this episode of the show possible. We want to thank our guest, Marla Stahl. Be sure to check out Grandma Charlotte's Adventures. I want to thank our sponsors, Megan Meehan. Check out her amazing online children's writing class. It is amazing. Can turn you into a published author in just 8 weeks. We also want to thank Dr. Connie K. Check out RollOnReading.com. And, of course, we want to thank the author of Noah Noasaurus, Elaine Kiley Kern. I want to thank my producer, Fatima Khan, for all that she does for the show. Check out her blog at readingwithyourkids.com. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. And, of course, we want to thank you. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. And, as always, thank you for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.